People often hear frightening assertions about Enoch and cremation, that fire cancels restoration. The surviving text is more complicated than that assertions. The question feels urgent because cremation leaves almost nothing familiar behind. A coffin, a grave, and a body create a visible geography for grief. Ashes seem to remove that geography. Ancient Jewish and Christian texts, however, did not begin by asking whether a body was intact enough for God. They began with a different question: who is just, who is violent, and what does divine judgment restore? This investigation follows the passages that are usually placed at the center of the assertions. We will look at First Enoch 22, where Enoch sees places assigned to the spirits of the dead. First Enoch 14, with its overwhelming vision of fire, and the Epistle of Enoch, where fire appears in warnings to the wicked. Then we will compare those passages with the manuscript record, Jewish burial practice, resurrection language, and the history of Christian cremation. The conclusion may be less sensational than the online assertions. It is also more useful. If you want investigations that distinguish an ancient text from the stories later told about it, subscribe to this channel. The first answer is already here. The Book of Enoch has afterlife imagery, but it does not provide a cremation manual. The physical starting point is not a secret vault. It is the manuscripts. Fragments of Enoch were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, especially in Cave 4 at Qumran. They show that several Enochic works circulated in Aramaic centuries before the complete Ethiopic collection became known in the West. That matters because it prevents two opposite mistakes. Enoch was not a medieval invention, but a fragment proving an ancient Enochic tradition does not automatically prove every modern interpretation of every later preserved chapter. The most complete form of First Enoch survives in Ethiopic or Guiz, within the Ethiopian Christian tradition. Scholars compare that complete collection with Aramaic fragments, Greek pieces, translations, and the literary history of its separate books. The collection is ancient and important. It is also layered. A responsible reading must ask which passage is being quoted, what kind of language it uses, and whether it is describing the fate of a person, the judgment of a violent ruler, or the symbolic destruction of evil. The first passage is First Enoch 22. Enoch is taken to a mountain with hollow places. He is told that the spirits of the dead are kept there until the great judgment. The scene is vivid: separated spaces, flowing water, a voice of accusation, and different conditions for the righteous and the wicked. It is one of the reasons readers call Enoch a map of the unseen world. But the map has a boundary. Chapter 22 sorts spirits according to moral condition and the circumstances of injustice. Abel's blood cries out because he was murdered. The righteous wait in a place associated with light and refreshment. The wicked face accusation and punishment. The passage is concerned with justice, murder, vindication, and final judgment. It does not say that a person who is cremated is sent to a special chamber. It does not say that ashes prevent resurrection. It does not establish an energetic anchor between a corpse and a soul. That does not make the chapter unimportant. It tells us that ancient Jewish apocalyptic imagination took the dead seriously. Death did not erase the demand for justice. A victim was not forgotten because a killer had hidden the body. In a world where graves could be disturbed, corpses could be lost in war, and the sea could take the drowned, that is a stronger assertion than a rule about one burial method. Divine judgment reaches the dead even when human memory cannot. Where does Enoch speak clearly, and where has a later fear been placed inside the text? The second passage often linked to the assertions is First Enoch 14. Enoch enters a vision of a vast house, a place marked by fire, lightning, fear, and a throne of glory. Ancient apocalyptic writing regularly uses fire in more than one way. Fire can reveal holiness. Fire can describe judgment. Fire can show terror, purification, destruction, or the limits of human approach to the divine. Context determines which function is active. In chapter 14, the fire belongs to a heavenly vision. It magnifies the distance between Enoch and the divine throne. The text does not introduce a human funeral or a cremated body. It does not tell the reader that ordinary flames on earth reproduce the fire of the vision. Turning every reference to fire into a coded statement about cremation skips the actual scene and creates a conclusion the chapter never states. The third cluster is in the Epistle of Enoch, chapters 91 through 108. These chapters contain sharp warnings to sinners who trust wealth, violence, and impunity. Fire appears there as part of judgment language. So do blood, destruction, grief, and the loss of name. This language is real and severe, yet its target is repeatedly the unjust life. Those who exploit, murder, corrupt, and celebrate their security while others suffer. That distinction is decisive. Ancient texts can use the same image for physical death and moral judgment without making the two identical. A person may die in a fire. A city may be consumed by fire. A violent ruler may be judged by fire. The author can place all three images in the same symbolic universe. It does not follow that every person whose remains encounter flame has received the moral sentence addressed to the wicked. This is where a careful reading becomes more unsettling in a good way. The Enochic warnings are not mainly about controlling the condition of a corpse. They are about the condition of a life. The recurrent questions are, what did you do with power? Did you shed innocent blood? Did you use knowledge to dominate? Did you think wealth could keep judgment away? The book's most relentless fire is directed at injustice, not at families making a funeral decision. At this point, comment with the word that changed the question for you: chambers, fire, or justice. It helps show which image readers carry into the text before the later history enters. There is still a historical fact that deserves attention. Burial was overwhelmingly normal among many Jewish communities of the Second Temple period. Tombs, ossuaries, family caves, shrouds, and the gathering of bones formed a powerful language of kinship, land, memory, and hope. Cremation was practiced in parts of the wider Mediterranean world, but it did not become the standard Jewish pattern. That difference was cultural and religiously meaningful. Yet a customary preference is not the same thing as a doctrine that God cannot restore ashes. The Hebrew Bible's most basic image of death is dust. Genesis describes humanity as dust returning to dust. Ecclesiastes speaks of dust returning to the earth and the spirit returning to God. Bodies are lost at sea, destroyed in war, scattered by animals, and reduced in graves long before any modern crematory appears. Biblical resurrection hope never depends on preserving a body from every natural process. The same point appears in Paul. In 1 Corinthians 15, Paul does not describe resurrection as the repair of a preserved corpse. He uses the image of a seed that is sown and transformed. What is sown is perishable. What is raised is imperishable. The argument is not that matter is worthless. It is that the Creator who gives a seed its body is not defeated by decay. Ashes do not create a problem larger than burial, time, water, or dust. Early Christian resistance to cremation had several sources. Christians lived in a Roman world where cremation could carry pagan associations. Burial also dramatized hope in bodily resurrection and followed the remembered burial of Jesus. Over centuries, these practices became embedded in law, liturgy, family memory, and theology. But the historical development should not be oversimplified into one missing verse from Enoch. The Roman Catholic Church's 20th century change is a useful example. In 1963, The prohibition on cremation was eased when cremation was not chosen as a denial of Christian belief. Later guidance continued to prefer burial, when possible, and asked that ashes be treated with reverence rather than scattered or divided casually. That position is about the dignity of the person, communal remembrance, and the meaning of the body. It is not an announcement that Enoch had discovered a hidden afterlife penalty. Other Christian communities differ in practice, but the central theological question is similar. Can the God who creates and raises the dead be limited by the manner in which remains return to the earth? Historic Christian answers have generally said no. They may prefer burial, warn against treating the body as disposable, or attach pastoral meaning to a grave. They do not make salvation depend on whether fire, soil, ocean, or time touch the body. The manuscript record also matters here. Qumran preserves portions of several Enochic books, including material related to the Book of Watchers and the Epistle. Ethiopia preserves the complete collection. Neither fact creates an untouched line from an ancient fragment to every dramatic sentence circulating online. The work of scholarship is slow because it compares languages, versions, dates, and literary forms. That slowness is not a cover-up. It is how a text is allowed to say only what it says. There's a more durable mystery underneath the frightening assertions. Why did writers like the authors of Enoch imagine distinct places for the dead? They were trying to say that history is not morally flat. A murdered person and a murderer do not simply vanish into the same silence. Hidden violence does not receive the last word. The dead are remembered before God, and justice is delayed without being erased. That is the emotional force of the chambers in chapter 22. The House of Fire carries a related force. It warns that divine reality cannot be made manageable. The language overwhelms the reader because the vision is meant to overwhelm Enoch. But it is a mistake to turn that sacred terror into a private sentence against every person whose body was cremated. The text points outward toward judgment and divine sovereignty, not toward a checklist for grieving families. This matters pastorally. Families do not encounter cremation as an abstract debate. They meet it after cost, distance, military service, disaster, a wish left by a parent, or a death that left no body to bury. An ancient document can deepen reflection on death without becoming a weapon against someone in grief. When the text does not answer, caution is more faithful than fear. If this distinction would help someone facing a difficult funeral question, share the investigation with them. Not to settle the question for them, but to replace a frightening assertions with the actual evidence. The final answer is therefore precise. First Enoch does describe temporary places for the dead. It uses fire in visions of heavenly majesty and in warnings of judgment. It preserves an ancient world in which burial mattered deeply. But it does not state that cremation sends a soul to a separate chamber, cancels restoration, or erases a person's identity. Those assertions add a modern certainty that the surviving passages do not provide. What Enoch does provide is a harder and more hopeful challenge. The destiny of the dead is connected to justice, memory, and the authority of God, not to human control over every particle of a body. The book asks whether violence will be answered, whether the righteous are remembered, and whether a world disfigured by corruption can be set right. Those questions remain after the flames are out and after the grave is closed. Return once more to the beginning. Ashes look final because they are visible proof of change. But ancient resurrection hope was never built on visible preservation. It was built on the conviction that the one who judges the living and the dead does not lose what human beings cannot keep. Which part of the evidence matters most to you? The Qumran manuscripts, the four chambers of First Enoch 22, or the resurrection language of Paul? Leave your answer below, and subscribe to this channel for the next investigation into the texts that shaped the ancient biblical world. One objection deserves a direct answer. If the body matters, why should the way it is treated after death not matter just as much? Ancient Jewish and Christian traditions would not answer by saying that it does not matter at all. Bodies were washed, carried, mourned, buried, named, and remembered. A grave was a place of kinship and a sign that a person's life belonged within a people and a land. The body was not a disposable shell. But dignity is not the same as a mechanical condition for resurrection. A body can be honored and still decay. It can be dishonored and still remain within the reach of God. Martyrs, people lost at sea, victims of war, and the unburied dead have all stood inside the moral imagination of these traditions. The scandal of their deaths was never that God had lost the material needed to raise them. It was that human cruelty had tried to erase their names. This helps explain the Book of Enoch's intensity. When Enoch speaks of a name being blotted out, the image belongs to moral memory and judgment. It is a reversal of the confidence of people who thought their wealth or violence made them permanent. The book does not ask whether a funeral process can erase a name. It asks whether a person who builds a life by erasing others can escape being remembered truthfully. Fire itself also has several roles in the ancient world. A lamp burns before text. A sacrifice burns at an altar. A city burns after conquest. A throne room shines with fire in a vision. A furnace becomes an image of testing. A funeral pyre becomes part of a different cultural practice. The same element can appear in all of those scenes without delivering the same meaning. Reading requires more than recognizing a word. It requires asking who is acting, what the scene is doing, and where the image belongs in the argument. The manuscript traditions make that discipline even more necessary. No single surviving copy places modern readers inside the original author's room. Qumran fragments can be damaged. Ethiopic manuscripts can be late copies of older material. Greek witnesses can preserve only a portion. Translation choices can carry theological habits. Scholars work by comparing witnesses, not by treating one dramatic English sentence as if it floated above history. That is why a responsible conclusion sometimes sounds less absolute than a viral headline. Yet the restraint does not empty the subject of meaning. It gives the subject its real weight. First Enoch pictures a universe in which the dead are not lost, hidden violence is not forgotten, and the powers that make the world cruel do not remain secure forever. Those themes resonate with the resurrection hope of early Christianity, even where Christians do not grant Enoch the same authority as biblical canon. For a family deciding between burial and cremation, this leaves room for conscience, tradition, cost, local law, and grief. Some will choose burial because the physical act expresses continuity with Jewish and Christian practice. Some will choose cremation for reasons that are neither careless nor hostile to faith. The ancient text can invite seriousness about the body. They should not be recruited to pronounce a verdict that their own words never pronounce. The question behind the question is finally not whether ash is too small for God to find. It is whether death has the final word over a person. In Enoch's world, it does not. The dead wait for judgment. The violent are called to account, and the righteous are remembered. In Paul's language, death is an enemy that will not keep its victory. Different texts, different voices, but a shared refusal to let decay become the final authority. That conviction does not make grief simple. It does make fear a poor interpreter. The manuscripts invite patience, reverence, and a refusal to confuse a dramatic image with a sentence no ancient page ever gives.